Well, I think the answer to the question of what is Digimon is actually very simple because whatever's currently airing is not Digimon, and what has ever already finished is Digimon, and whatever's currently on can't possibly live up to that. Welcome to a special episode of Podigus, a monthly gathering of disembodied voices that haunt your podcast feed, your spooky companion through Digimon Ghost Game.
This week we're discussing episode 1, The Sewn-Lip Man. I'm Jeff, and I ain't afraid of no ghosts, except for the one ghost that is the official Digimon Halloween song, It's Spooky in Here, by the group that sang Who Let the Dogs Out, which will haunt me forever.
I'm Aster, and I'm watching spooky, scary Digimon that sends shivers down your spine.
And I'm Toya, and I am so glad to have ghosted Digimon Adventure 2020.
Oh my god. You didn't ghost it, though. You did actually watch it.
No! Are you kidding me? How do I work up the motivation to do that after all that trauma? I got to those last episodes and I'm like, I don't want to do this. I don't like this. I'm not on the clock.
Speaking of clockmons, no. Well, so this is an exception to our normal format for the season. I think I explained this in a prior episode, but it was kind of tucked in at the end of an episode, I think. So people may not have gotten the message that our strategy, our plan for Ghost Game is instead of covering each episode week by week, that took a lot of time. And so we're going to take a step back and cover in 4 episodes at once a month, basically. And this episode is an exception because we're here reacting to just episode 1. And, you know, covering 4 episodes at once is kind of fitting. 4 in Japanese is a spooky number.
And in East Asian or languages based on Chinese. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There are a lot of buildings that don't include the number 4, a floor number, because it sounds like death. And that's a little spooky. That's a complete coincidence that I only realized when I was writing the notes for this episode. But, you know. And if you're used to the coverage of Adventure 2020, we didn't have unique episode titles because they were lined up exactly to the Adventure 2020 episode titles. And so, you know, just if you're looking through the podcast player and seeing that, like, now there are these weird titles that don't line up with the titles episodes, that's why. Because aside from this one, we're going to be covering 4 episodes at once. So that's what's going on. And yeah, for this week, we're going to be talking about everything in Ghost Game episode 1, and which includes the preview for episode 2, but nothing beyond that. And we will give you a warning if we spoil anything in late stages of other Digimon seasons. But yeah.
Hi to everyone here for the first time. If anyone's coming in, jumping in with Ghost Game.
Oh gosh, yeah. I hope you're jumping in with Ghost Game. If you got in, okay, look, if you didn't watch Digimon Adventure 2020, don't worry, you're not missing anything.
Right.
Welcome to my happy place, a season I actually like.
Oh goodness.
I don't regret covering Adventure 2020, but yeah, I think there's not a ton that you missed if you weren't following it super closely.
I thank you for bringing me on this podcast, but But if anybody is jumping in for the first time with this podcast or with the series, either one, hope you enjoy our coverage of it.
Yeah, I guess. Actually, that's a good point. I guess we should give like a really brief introduction. I guess by means of Digimon introduction, I guess we should go around and each say our favorite season of Digimon.
Oh dear.
Give a vibe of what kind of things we like.
My favorites are 02, Sabers, and Atmon. That's 3 of them. But as you can tell, I have a strong preference for because I say there's a dichotomy between isekai and urban fantasy. So as you can tell, I'm kind of more on the urban fantasy camp. So obviously, this new series being about that angle pleases me deeply.
Toya?
Yeah, so I'm Toya, and my favorite series are, oh gosh, I think on the Adventure 2020 podcast, in those days, I might have said my favorite was Cross Wars, and then I had to go on a 20-minute rant explaining that. Actually, it may have shifted. I think that I might be gravitating more towards Atmon as my favorite series.
Wow.
I mean, that's understandable. I wish I had a solid, definitive answer for this question, but I don't. I feel like it shifts every time I think about it. As time passes, my affection increases more and more over time. So like it's basically whichever season I haven't watched in the longest time or haven't thought about in the longest time.
I do, my preferences have changed a lot. I did a rewatch last year, several things. I'm doing rewatches with friends now. This is our pandemic coping strategy. And I kind of appreciate the fact that there's so much to like about it, so many things that like it's possible for things to change like this so much.
Yeah, I think I consider all of them on roughly equal footing aside from Hunters, which
No, Hunters is garbage. I liked Cross Wars, and even I won't recommend Hunters to anybody.
so yeah, aside from that, everything else, it's like, I might feel differently after having recently rewatched it, but like if it's been a couple years, I'll be like, oh my God, that season was amazing. I can't wait to rewatch it. So,
Yeah.
but even just like being in close proximity to Aster makes my affection for 02 go higher and higher. So
That's good. That's my job.
I too appreciate this greatly.
yeah, so yeah, I can't easily identify my favorite, but yeah, I guess let's get into this first episode. What did you think? Gut impression?
It was really artsy, actually. I was surprised by that. There was so much to unpack, and I guess that was kind of shocking, especially coming off of Adventure 2020, which was not so much on the nuance to unpack, but like already like with this first episode, I'm like, okay, I think I need to watch this again and start taking notes, because there was
Right?
there was a lot to like go over, and so I think I ended up watching it maybe 4 times because I was like wanting to take out the notebook and like pointing at things. Every time I watched it again, I noticed something different, which is really good. Whenever I always think that's like a really good thing whenever like you get compelled to like rewatch something several times because there was something you missed. Like obviously there's like the hype factor, but I think also like there is definitely like something about like when you're crammed in like all the details and like or things that like having the context of the end of the episode really helps the context at the beginning of the episode. Like for instance, at the beginning they use a lot of like very quick and subtle ways to introduce things. Like with the holograms, I really like the fact that they gave you like a very like quick montage of just showing how pervasive they are in real life right now. So
Yeah.
like you really like understood like, okay, very quickly, okay, they're part of like the local like world to this degree. And like what it shows, they even showed like an example of like a standard glitched hologram that's not necessarily spooky. And then we got to Hiro, like the introduction of Hiro, and like they had a couple shots that like it took me until like the second watch for it to really hit me after I had the context of the rest of the episode. But like the fact that they framed all the shots of him like in the dormitory to drive home the point that his life sucks right now. Like he's like dragging his feet living life because it's like you wake up, all the other people are here, and it's like I don't want to be in this dormitory because I can't live with my family right now. It's like very the mood would like kind of really hit. So I thought that was kind of interesting to see like how much of that there was to unpack on like multiple watches.
It really was like every single scene contributed something. This was the Die Hard of Digimon seasons. Like
okay.
really, like everything is building up to something else, which coming off of Adventure 2020 where I could like have it in a corner of my screen a lot of the time, just barely paying attention and still getting the whole plot. Okay, I have to stop with the 2020 comparisons at some point.
Yeah, really.
But I really liked the build up here, and I actually got Mega Man Star Force vibes of all things out of the use of the hologram technology, because it's very similar to like this idea of EM, electromagnetic wave technology, that they're using in that old video game series. And Star Force never got a good anime adaptation, so like I'm glad to have this kind of weird spiritual successor here. And the other thing is like, this series, even if you weren't like keeping up with the pre-release hype or the posters or any of that, I felt like this episode actually introduced its 3 core characters and highlighted them really well without dwelling on them too much.
Yeah. Like I already feel I know quite a bit about them for the fact that they didn't do very much in the episode.
Although, what is his name with the very long...
Kiyoshiro.
Yeah, we'll go with that. Kiyoshiro, it's very distracting to me that I think he's Ishida Akira, right?
Yeah.
So he's voiced by Shinonome Soma from Cardfight Vanguard G, who was like a major antagonist in that, and he's using like almost the exact same voice for him.
I've seen him in so much anime now that like I don't have a single role to associate with him anymore. So
I'm so like I feel like we got a good glimpse into his character, but like I feel like he is both a mix of common archetypes and also like doesn't make any sense. So like I assume at this point that his people who haven't read the like background info and stuff, the stuff we've been teased is that he is supposed to be, which wasn't really mentioned in this episode, but he's supposed to be a grad student in America who came back to live in or to go to middle school. So I assume that he's just lying about that and is being like a Chunibyo and is like, oh yes, I went to grad school in America.
That's why his hands are
It's possible.
bandaged, because he is a Chunibyo.
Yeah.
Yep. I was talking about like the fact that like we now have a competitor to like Joe senpai and turning out to be a senpai who's an absolute idiot.
Yeah, like watching the episode, my boyfriend commented that like I forget what line he had said that made him think this, but he was like, "Oh, it's the new Joe senpai." And I was like, kind of, but also not really. But also like I feel like this is the embodiment of the energy they injected into Joe in Adventure 2020
That's what
that I
I
didn't
mean. Yeah,
love.
yeah.
That like wanting to be called senpai. That yeah, it felt weird with Joe, but it feels at home here.
Yeah, well, I don't think Joe ever wanted to be like senpai, but he was like the kind of person who like was act like he had like the capability of like putting things together in that kind of responsible role, and then actually no, like in like 20 seconds, it turns out no, never mind.
I do think that like the panicky reaction and moments with him are going to be his defining character bit, because that was like the part that stands out the most in terms of his flavor, right?
Yeah, that he's like screaming.
Okay, I love how we didn't see it in the episode itself, but in the ending song, he doesn't just have like Japanese talismans. He has like every different religion and spirituality to protect himself.
He's got his bases covered, okay?
Yeah, one of each. That's so great. I don't. Speaking of the three protagonists, I don't know what a better choice would be, but the romanization of Ruli.
Duty. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know where that like came from, other than like the fact that that's the official romanization on the website and other things. So like maybe there will be like a plot reason later, but I don't know.
Part of me wants to believe that that will be the case, but also I was just looking at the official Wicross translations that after 7 years of calling something grow, decided the correct English translation printed on everything will be glow.
Oh no.
And also banish is now vanish for some reason, and sometimes there's no rhyme or reason to why something ends up a certain way. It just, somebody in Japan decides that they are going to write things with certain English letters, and you end up with that.
Because her name is in kanji too.
Yeah.
So it's like very weird.
Yeah, I mean it's going to be a weird name to pronounce in English for people who aren't familiar with Japanese names. Is it like an awkward Japanese name by any sense, or is it a common name?
No, it's very common. Yeah.
Well, I mean, she was introduced before Hero, so I think technically she's the true main character.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see more of her, but I think the the best moment of the episode was Gamamon's vibe check.
Yes,
shouting, "You have bad vibes," and
I'm really impressed with the translation for this episode. I don't know if like the fact I was very middling on Adventure 2020's translation. I don't know, maybe because the contents didn't have a lot to unpack to like translate in terms of making zinger lines, so like I didn't really have like an opinion on it. But I was watching this one. First of all, the title of this episode, the Sewn-Lip Man, like this is after like everybody was like debating whether it should be like the stitched mouth man, the mouth stitched man, and like because of the literally has gucci, which means mouth. So like everyone was like, and then here's like the Sewn-Lip Man, and everyone's like, oh right. That's exactly what it is. That's correct, actually. And then finally, yeah, as you said, the turning the phrase "iyana kanji," which literally just means like bad feeling, feels bad. Yeah. But like you give me bad vibes. I was just like, oh, that's so good. I love it.
I love everything about Gamamon. I want to take him home with me.
Like that like language was like power came from Hiro. Hiro kara chikara kita. Like he drawls so cutely. This was perfect casting. Thank you.
I love him continuously chewing on Hiro.
Yes, and also trying to chew on Hiro's dad, but he'd being disappointed it's a hologram.
Yeah. That's how you test if it's a hologram or not. You try to eat it.
That's probably what he's going to do from now on.
Yeah. This is exactly what my dog is like.
I mean, Gachmon had the power of searching, and Gamamon has the power of eating to see if it's a hologram.
He's just a shark. He interacts with everything with his mouth.
And also, I mean, the teases of Gamamon's evolution in the opening, I thought.
Yeah.
They're all really fantastic.
Oh, they look amazing.
Also, the choice to have the first enemy be Clockmon means that because his power is showing people's future for a second, that you can have that tease of something very terrible is coming with Gamamon in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like the this is a kind of plot beat that I don't know where it like originates in Japanese storytelling, but I've noticed it in like Evangelion when Unit 01 goes berserk in the first episode, and also in like Persona 3 when Thanatos shows up as you're like at the first time you summon a persona. It's a kind of it's an element that comes up a lot, right? That you kind of foreshadow it by showing the terrible future right in the first episode.
Right. I mean, in this franchise, it's always the cutest and sweetest, most innocent looking ones that always turn out to be the scariest and like most feral. So,
Just
Yeah.
like in real life.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice how in the episode itself, like they really mix that cute and feralness.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, I mean, I'm actually a little torn in terms of like how hype to be from this episode. Because like I feel like there are so many things to be intrigued about, but I'm not like there's yet to be like something that like has me really, really hooked.
I think, yeah, like it executed all the good beats of like what you need in a first episode to like get what the premise is so you understand what you're going to be dealing with from here on out. It all got that all out on the table in a surprisingly efficient amount of time. So I just really like the style. How do I put it? Like it's very artsy in both like visuals and in terms of just like the way they present things.
The mix of foreground and background animation is really clever.
When they were constantly playing up like the series is going to be really scary, like in all the advertising, and I'm like, okay, I want to know what they mean by like scary, because there's like edgy scary, or there's like spooky scary skeletons, kind of like not actually scary. but I was quite intrigued. I think they really were right when they say like it's scary, but in the kind like you can't take your eyes off of it somehow.
Yeah, I guess the thing that the looming specter over my head, the ghost to my game, so to speak, is that I guess I'm just wary because like if you were to in a vacuum judge Adventure 2020 by just this first episode, I feel like you could make a lot of not the same but like similar kind of conclusions, or like
we'll get to that when I have my little thing about my experience yesterday watching every single first episode of every Digimon series.
I did get burned pretty hard, really adoring the first 2 episodes of Digimon Adventure 2020.
Yeah, you told me to come out of my boycott hole because of it, I remember.
I'm so sorry I dragged you into this. I should have left you shut in.
It's like all these signs are fantastic if they aren't anomalies for the first episode.
Right.
So yeah, that's what I'm hoping for. I think the tease, the foreshadowing of whatever Gamamon's evolution is, which I think that was the one that wasn't named in the opening.
Yeah.
That's the most intriguing thing for me.
Yeah.
I keep rewinding back to that opening sequence where they're showing the montage of the holograms and the different technology and like the water coming out of the billboard.
Yeah.
And it's really cool that like they have this faux Twitter interface showing up to like do the exposition, but then also there's like a moment where you see what is very obviously a 2-channel post.
Yeah. It's funny how they're all using Line too, because like I was even seeing like discourse about whether Line is getting less popular in favor of Twitter these days, but I guess even in the near future they are still using Line regularly, thankfully. I love that platform, so I'm hoping it sticks around. If they do not release Line stickers for this anime, I'm going to be really offended.
Yeah, it's really disappointing how many there's only like 1 or 2 maybe official Digimon sticker sets online,
and they're both adventure.
Yeah. And I have them both.
I have them as well.
They are good, but
what if they never do a Line stamp set for this series, and then in like a week they announce, here's the official Digimon Ghost game Discord with its own custom emojis.
God. Well, they do have the official Line account, which I am following. So,
but yeah, I feel like my memories of Atmon are a little hazy. But like Atmon had a similar weirdness where like it was set several decades in the future, but was still, aside from some obvious anomalies in tech, which I won't mention because it's a big spoiler, it's mostly just near future tech and hasn't changed a ton.
Right. And like that's simultaneously very realistic and not realistic, because in some ways, like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be expecting flying cars by 2045, but you do see things like the pepper robots or pepper sugar robots being more common and all that. But yeah, it's a very minor tweaks in comparison. And here it's just like holograms everywhere, and now we have 7G.
Yeah, I think 7G is a really neat way to seed how much time has changed without explicitly saying it. It's just like, this feels near future. It's not like a year or 2 away. It's like, a couple years away. And
even the police crossing tape is holographic.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was a cool detail.
Actually, one thing I wanted to ask, when they said at the beginning that like the incident was spotted in Sapporo, so
Oh yeah.
does this mean this takes place in like Hokkaido?
I was wondering that. Like the city, I mean, it
Oh.
kind of gave me Sapporo vibes, but I was like, it also just gives me generic
Yeah.
city vibes.
I mean, I've been to Sapporo, so like I feel like if they show more of it, maybe I'll be able to tell because so much has changed with the holograms. I can't tell for sure.
Yeah.
But
Well, hopefully if it's a I mean, I miss the seasons changing in Digimon series,
yeah.
so if it does that, then I think it'll be clear if it's like there's tons of snow and they have to use tunnels underground to go places. So
The
yeah.
Digimon series not in Tokyo.
Well, Savers was the furthest we had so far, which is Yokohama. But
and Adventure 2020 was like halfway there, kind of almost. Yeah.
Kawasaki. Yeah. But yeah, if we're all the way in Hokkaido, that'll be really interesting. That's the birthplace of Hatsune Miku, so maybe the future really is there.
that must be the reason for the holograms. They'll go to a Miku concert at one point.
That's not a hologram. Well, it might be in this anime. I don't know.
Oh man, that's totally possible, huh?
It's a joke in, like among like Miku fans that like when there's a Miku concert, it's actually a projection on like cloth. So like whenever people talk about a hologram concert, like the first like instinctive reaction is that's not a hologram, but here it might actually be.
I'm waiting for a Digimon series set in Osaka.
It's just gonna be Tentamon talking to himself.
Yeah, sure.
I think the worst moment of the episode though is the teacher. I do not like his design. The triangle eyes, like I don't know.
Keep like Hey Arnold kind
Yeah,
of.
it looks like he
yeah.
walked out of a Western cartoon.
He reminds me of like I mean I think it feels like he's coming out of a Western cartoon, but also like the like schmucky nerdy guy from Sailor Moon with the like swirly glasses, like that.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like, oh, this guy's just a schmuck. Like
Melvin.
yeah. Oh, one moment I thought was really well done was just the like using Hero seeing the police car as the thing that like triggers his flashback.
Yeah.
Like that was really like that was totally seamless into weaving that flashback into the story in a way that was completely natural.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was nice. They got a lot of territory done in only one episode, like Hiro's backstory, and then like the setting up the general premise, and a little bit of exposition, a little bit of fun, a little bit of personality introduction. And
Yeah, like we're already empathizing with these kids over their family situation. Usually that takes at least 30 episodes, right?
yeah.
Or it takes 67 and then but okay, one question I had actually about the culture of this, the setup of being in a like essentially a boarding school. That's not something I've really seen in anime, so I wasn't sure if it's like, does it happen in Japan?
It does happen. Actually, I was recently watching Blue Reflection Ray, and there was actually also a dormitory for that girls' school. And actually, like one of the girls, like specifically moved in because the plot point was that like there was two sisters, and ever since like their parents were gone, like they had like were developing like dependency issues. So the older sister had her sister move into the dormitory, hoping that it would cut off their mutual dependency. So. It is a thing. There is also like dormitory leaders like Kiyoshiro.
I know that it's more common with high schools, but usually the situation when somebody's attending a dorm for school is that like they got into a prestigious school, but it's far away from where they live.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that kind of thing. With Hiro, it's kind of like I do kind of like the fact that they are actually driving home that he is actually like really lonely, like without having anybody in home right now. Because like when they first said like, oh, my mom is working abroad, and I was like, oh, okay, convenient excuse to make sure he doesn't have a parent in his life, which is it is still true probably, but when I was rewatching the episode again, and like they were driving in, how lonely he is, like at the beginning, and like how it kind of the implication that like the reason why everyone dumps stuff on him, and even if he doesn't really want to do it, he just takes it anyway, is like kind of implied that he's just like, I don't have anything better to do. Like he's so like apathetic and like lonely because he's just like there's like nothing to live for at this point.
And now he has a baby brother. It's so good.
Who probably had to be like introduced as his baby brother because like it's very likely he would have seen it as like just another like weird obligation. But because like his dad, the one who he's like emotionally searching for, is the one who slammed it down and says, okay, you treat him like as your new brother, got it? And like of course Nahida's gonna be like, well, I have something to live for now. This is exaggeration, but
oh, this poor kid. I want to give him a hug.
It does. All that characterization is so subtle. I'm curious if it's gonna like come to a head later on, or if it's just like he's gonna, like now that Gamon's in his life and he gets to do Digimon adventures, if it's like things are gonna improve drastically. But yeah, I definitely didn't get like trying to think like there aren't really any Digimon protagonists who are like I can think any other characters that are like extremely lonely.
not really, no.
Like Takato is the most that I associate as being like a typical nerd or something. But like he has fun, he has tons of friends and
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
he plays Digimon with them.
Yeah, I think everybody seemed to have like a reasonable social circle.
The only ones that come off as like if you think lonely Digimon characters, you think supporting characters like
Right.
Ruki or the brothers in Frontier.
Right. And it's
Mhm.
like for one thing we were having like a we were having like an internal discussion before this anime started whether Hiro would be like the third Digimon protagonist to use Boko or whether he would be using like Ore. And like the reason why this is significant for those who are not up to date on their Japanese first person pronoun usage. Boko is more polite and like a little more like it's just like it's generally like more polite and like maybe a little reserved, and then Ore is like the more like assertive, aggressive. And so far we've only had Takato and Haru who use Boku because they're like more like reserved or polite. And then so we were talking about like the personality description we had of Hiro, like whether like someone he's like relied on people and seems to be like a nice kid, like whether he would be like Boku Ore. Turns out the answer is Ore. And so this actually surprised my friend. And I told her, well, it kind of looks like he does kind of have like he is kind of like assertive in a sense, and he is kind of like casual, but it's also just like because he's like coasting through life so much right now, he doesn't have it in him to be like aggressive per se.
Yeah, I think that I find it interesting that he has a like just wanting to help everyone kind of vibe, but like we talked about before in speculation that like that's not really he doesn't have like a goody two shoes kind of vibe. Or like he's the things he does in
No.
this episode, he like helps his friend kind of cheat and then break into a boat after school. So it's like
Yeah, he's responsible, but also he can lockpick things.
yeah.
And it's like he does it because he was asked to. Whether he agrees with it or not doesn't really matter. They just like, fine, sure.
He's not an honor student. Well, he probably
Yeah.
has good grades.
And it's interesting seeing his parents' professions. Well, I guess we didn't see the dad's profession; we just saw his proclivities. But
Yeah.
hearing about his mom, like traveling the world to help. What was it? Was it helping
Refugees.
refugees? Yeah. So like, it seems like a similar kind of like maybe that's where he got his
Yeah.
wanting to help people.
That's what I thought too.
And the dad appears to be a misplaced super robot anime dad. He's gonna build the kids a robot and then disappear mysteriously one day until the aliens invade.
The whole thing about like, oh, you just interrupted me, did you? No, I didn't.
Also, this is like a tiny, tiny detail, but I think it shows that they're putting the effort to get these details right. Is when he disappears, like the vital bracelet device falls, like where it lands on the floor is not like part of the floor disappeared in a spherical shape.
Right.
And you like see like through the floorboards in a way that would, if it were like a sphere that disappeared instead of just, it would be easier to animate just on the floor. But
something happened.
Yeah,
he blew himself up.
He's off having his own isekai adventure. He's the adventure protagonist.
There's been some people guessing that the Blacktailmon might actually be his partner.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. A reference. Well, I'm curious what you guys think if it's a likely reference or not. But I posted it on Twitter already that I got vibes of the Yamato Transport Black Cat mascot.
Oh,
It's like pretty common in Japan because especially the logo on the Blacktailmon's clothes, which I don't think that's not part of a normal design.
No, that's new, so that might have some relevance.
And it was kind of vague in this episode, but it's like it seemed like the Blacktailmon was kind of delivering Gamamon.
Right, had some role.
If you go back and look at the episode right around the like 8-minute 15-second mark, you can see it's not just the floor that it took a circular chunk out, it was also the desk and the bookshelves and part of the books, but not all of the books.
Right. Like I think there's like something about this we said about like when he's like attention to detail and animation. If you're just talking about like making something look aesthetically nice, that's one thing. But also there's like attention to detail in which those details actually like are hinting at something, or were not strictly like necessary if this were a straightforward, but like it's hinting. There is like some nuance in that hinting. Atmon actually had a lot of things like that, like little like background details that were not strictly necessary, but also like contribute to like furthering the plot, or sometimes we're just there for like dumb but cute reasons. Like one of my best examples of this is when Astra meets Muzamon for the first time, and the way it's delivered is his Apply Drive is delivered is like in a box from a drone, right? And like the box comes down and it's a parody of Amazon's like arrow logo, but instead of Amazon it says Muzamon. It's like all these like little cute details like that. Like there's a lot of thought put into like the setting or just like unnecessary things like that. Like I always really appreciate things like that.
Yeah, it's the kind of like these kind of details being in there feel like the kind of thing that, not to use a strange metaphor, but like feels like them eating their vegetables. as opposed to like
Yeah.
the stuff that was flashy and showy in Adventure 2020's premiere was like, you know, felt like it was the kind of stuff that you know, it's not the subtle background details, it was the like try to catch your eye with really flashy animation, and then
Yeah.
we later see there's not tons behind it. So I am definitely more intrigued by these kind of things. And I'm also curious, since Clockmon gets away at the end, like maybe maybe he'll just keep showing
That
up to
surprised me.
foreshadow things. Like, I'm here to see someone's future. Okay.
They said
And then
at
run
the
away again.
they said at the Diginavi stream that like beating the opponent via defeat is the last thing they want to do for this series.
Hmm.
So there's probably going to be resolutions that involve like befriending or like other like interesting like solutions that like they may defeat by battle, but I don't think we're going to have like a huge like capture or kill count or something, which may be interesting.
Yeah, because I was like expecting that they would defeat him in the first episode and he would like become a dim card or something.
Oh, but he just
And
ran.
Yeah, I like that being less formulaic, or like kind of, yeah, I don't like that. I don't know, the series where Digimon does it, where it's like you collect the Digimon just becomes a thing and then you collect it. Don't love that aspect of it.
I just like the idea of maybe not endorsing solving everything with violence.
Yeah, I'm curious how much that will last throughout the season, because I feel like Atmon 2 had a, and this is vague recollection because I haven't rewatched it in 5 years, but like I remember there being a lot more about actual like app mechanics in the beginning, and then eventually
Right.
it became like battle and just beat the enemy kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if this is going to follow a similar trajectory, or and I guess similarly with Tamers, with like having the unique card slash mechanics, and then eventually be like, no, just evolve.
Back in Adventure, during the first like File Island arc, you'll notice they don't actually like destroy any of the enemies until actually Devimon like makes them kind of have to do it.
yeah, they just beat him up until the black gear pops out. Look, I solve all my problems with violence, and that's why I'm recording this podcast from prison.
Well, it was either to the Black Gear popped out, but even in the very very early episodes before the Black Gears even came to like into play, like Shellmon and like Seedramon, it was legitimately just like fight just enough until they decide to leave us alone.
Yeah, like seeing Mummymon in the preview for next week, my boyfriend was like, oh, so I guess power levels aren't going to really be a thing in this series. And I was like, well, I mean, maybe, but also like that's kind of the track record for Digimon in the beginning. You know, have take down some foes before they need to be having life or death battles.
Also, I like that one line in the episode preview that says sometimes maybe the human might be more rotten than the mummy, which is implying that like there might also be like, you know, humans, the human like partially causing it. Like if you have seen like the beginning episodes of Sabers or some of the cases in Cyber Sleuth, there is a Digimon at causing like the major problem, but then there was like a human pulling the strings or like synchronizing with them, or kind of like the actual mastermind, or even if they weren't the mastermind, like their own personal emotions got caught up in it.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we're going to be dealing with the not so savory human next episode, especially because if you think about the fact that it's taking from Kitaro, and Kitaro is also big on like sometimes the humans are the problem, not the yokai.
Yeah, well, all exciting signs. I think the main topic I wanted to move into next was well, this is something that I wrote down as a topic I thought was a novel question for us to discuss, and then it turned out after you had already accidentally done exactly that research the day before. But I wanted to discuss how this kind of relates to other Digimon premieres, and you know, like where it falls and what our favorite other premieres were.
So I did in fact watch every single opening episode of every Digimon TV series yesterday. I counted Hunters as a separate one, just because it kind of reset the narrative at the time. I also watched it with a friend who has not seen any Digimon except Adventure in 02 20 years ago with the Latin American dub. So we had a pretty mostly like fresh perspective on a lot of these episodes. So it was interesting to see like what she also thought of a lot of these episodes without like the bias of, so you had me who like remembers everything, or at least roughly, about what happened in every season is looking in retrospect, and then you also had her who was like almost completely new to a lot of things, and especially new to it in Japanese. So I actually like even took notes on this because I just wanted to like remember this for later, not necessarily just for the podcast. I was heavily reminded on how, so I have like mixed feelings about like the question of whether a first episode is properly representative of what you should expect for the rest of the series, because on one hand, Adventure probably has one of the worst opening episodes of this entire franchise, and I'm not even going to mince words on that. Like,
yeah,
it is literally, we introduce you 7 characters, we introduce you another 7 characters, the 7 characters are now changing, we have to introduce them again, and it's like they spend so much time like sticking to this. It's like I'm Daichi, and then like I'm Yamato, and like I'm like they introduce every single one. They like dedicate whole seconds to like moving to this character and then this character and then this character and then this character, and it's like it doesn't sell anything practically. Like it's
Yeah.
like it's so it's a turn off, and it's actually why I have a hard time getting people to watch like adventure on their own nowadays. I have to do like a group watch with them because like I have to promise them, no, this series gets better later. I promise. This is not representative of the rest of the series in this sense. However, I will say that like maybe I can say this because I have like ability to look back on this, so obviously I'm biased by confirmation bias, but I do definitely notice that there are things you can say about how each first episode represents each later series in certain ways. So like we were talking about the reboot, and we were talking about like having high hopes for the reboot, and like how like it was gonna, so I kind of decided, I was watching the reboot. That was the second to last episode I watched yesterday. The first reboot episode is like the first time I've seen it since back when I first started watching the series. And I kind of like decided to sit down and think, what did I like about this episode in particular, and what made everybody like get really hyped about it, and how does it compare to how the series actually turned out? Turns out you can actually spot a lot of signs about how the series eventually turned out from that first episode, because we were all having high expectations of the characters because at the time we thought it might still resemble Adventure Time. So now that like I had all of the like it's going to resemble Adventure just taken out of my brain and just decided to like evaluate that first episode completely by itself, there are a lot of signs about how like the series ended up turning out. Because the thing is, we start off, we introduce the premise of the network, we meet the new version of Taichi, we meet the new version of Koshiro. 30 seconds later, a huge crisis happens with the train. Taichi just like runs after them and just like jumps over the subway banister without thinking about what that means. We don't know anything about him. We don't know anything about his family. We don't know anything about his personality other than the fact that he thinks Koshiro is kind of cool. He just jumps into the fray, suddenly is taken into the network, meets Agumon. The two of them decide that they like each other now and immediately start fighting together. Agumon and Taichi don't actually talk very much, surprisingly. And especially after coming off like so many like episodes back to back of like seeing how much like each human like partner was like interacting with each other. They really don't talk to each other very much at all. They just go like straight into the fighting. There's fighting, more fighting, about 20 minutes of fighting straight. Koshiro finally comes in, and it turns out that his computer just miraculously became like amazing. It became awesome, as he put it. Like his computer just miraculously now suddenly knows all these things about what you. We don't even get to see the scene of how like Koshiro like learned about like Digimon. Like it all happens off screen. He calls and Taichi's like, yeah, I learned all this thing. These are called Digimon, and they're like digital monsters. And also, if you don't fix this problem immediately, the train is going to crash. Like he suddenly knows like everything. And then finally, like they resolve the problem. But then Koshiro says, oh, now a missile is about to get fired because the U.S. got hacked. It's like, now that I look back at it, like all the signs were there that it was just going to go like straight into like action and fighting before introducing any characters, any background, any whatsoever, or even really elaborating on its like world building. And especially because like when I was watching so many things back to back, one of the first things I was checking, especially with like the reboot on the mind, was like, how much do we learn about these characters in only one episode, like from like personality or quirks? And like even in Cross Wars and Hunters, like you learn like, and actually my friend who was watching this for the first time says she got a really good impression of the Cross Wars and Hunters characters from those first episodes, because like they definitely like show you like what's unique about each characters and what's like gives them off personality. She especially liked the depiction of the Digimon in the first episode of Cross Wars, because she's like, I already have like a good idea of like their personality and what's individually like quirky about them in only one episode. And so I really, that was like actually like you could tell like where it was going, what its priorities were. All of that was actually very clear in the first Reboots episode. It's just like at the time, well, I mean, again, maybe I'm saying this because I know where the reboot went, but like at the time, we were still expecting it to be more like Adventure or like any other conventional Digimon series. So we weren't really thinking that hard about it. But now that I look back on it, like the entire like spirit of the reboot is actually there, condensed in one episode. So when I look back at even Adventures, I said it wasn't very good. It was kind of boring. But then at the same time, when I look at the fact that it takes the time to sit down and introduce every single character, constantly trying to show you what each different character's reaction is, which is basically what you can say about the rest of the series, which Adventure doesn't really have an interesting plot at all if you're just talking about the progression of the story or the intrigue or mystery behind it. There's like none. But it's all about the characters. It's so much about the characters. The plot is just totally like barely relevant. And that's exactly what that first episode was. We are going to make sure you learn about these characters and everything unique and different about each one from each one of each other. And we're going to introduce it to you 5 times.
Yeah, like even the big moments in Adventure that I think of as big and plotty, like, well, I guess we said we weren't going to spoil things in all of Digimon seasons, so I won't. When the everyone's favorite arc, which happens in a particular place, and people
Yes.
refer to it by the place that it takes place in.
Yes.
That arc is not like, it's exciting because the character focus and also because the villain,
Yes.
like what the villain is doing in that arc is very similar to plot beats in Adventure 2020, but like that villain's been built up enough that it's like, it feels like
Yeah.
you're invested and scared of them doing the thing instead of just being like, oh, they're obviously attacking the place that they always
Yeah.
attack. But yeah, like Adventure 2020, like in reacting to that episode, like as you're spelling it out, like I think most Digimon fans made a lot of assumptions that we assumed
Yeah.
this is not going to be par for the course. This is like, they're obviously going to slow down and get into the character focus. And it's like, no, they were honest.
That was literally every episode. Like, especially the fact that like it was especially like a clear contrast after like a whole like, what is it, 8 episodes of like things that were not like that. The fact that I was just watching like solid action for like 20 minutes and nothing else was such a sharp contrast to like all the 8 for it that were going out of their way to like show you like the quirks of each character in contrast to the other character. Like even Hunters that came right before it, which was probably the one that was most assuming that you had seen like 2 series of crosswords already, was still like working very hard to actually like sell you on the different like ways like Tagiru like reacts to certain things, what kind of relationship he's building with Gumdramon, the fact that like what Gumdramon's priorities are, that you can tell very quickly that he's like planning on using Tagiru as like his plan to become like better in the hunt. Like all of these things about like the characterization and the individual quirks are like, they make a very serious effort to put that on the table within the very short time they have. And I realized the reboot never did that.
Yeah, and looping back around to what you were saying about Adventure, the original Adventure, having like I basically sorted each premiere into like basically whether I was really hooked, whether I was intrigued, or whether I was lukewarm. And Adventure, the original Adventure, is the only one that I look back on and think of as being a lukewarm reaction. But that's
Yeah.
mainly because nowadays the concept of isekai is commonplace. Back then, I think it had a bit more of an original vibe, especially compared to Pokemon.
I think it had an original vibe. I do think the first 4 series also had the benefit of the fact that in real life you already know what Digimon is because you're surrounded by like those like Tamagotchi spin-offs like everywhere. So you know what it is. It's a huge deal. You don't really have to be introduced to Digimon that much because like it's already kind of like ingrained in the local culture. It's like you make it like a Super Sentai or a Power Ranger, so you don't really need to explain what a Power Ranger is because like everyone kind of knows that already. But like, so you have that advantage that you don't have to explain as much in the first 4 compared to like everything later. But I think like actually the biggest issue I have with Adventure's first thing is not just the isekai, but it's also it kind of boring, honestly. Like it's just like they introduce over and over. It's more introduction, more introduction, more introduction, more introduction. But like again, like it's introduction, but the point is you learn about each character's quirks and like how each character talks differently from all of the others. And that is basically what the rest of the series is going to be about. It is going to be so much about these characters at the expense of practically anything else.
Even in the context of like Adventure being an isekai series in like what, the last week of 1999 or something, when I compare it to other series, the isekai premise isn't as hooking as it is in like Magic Knight Rare,
right?
Or I guess Inuyasha was from about that same time too. I think that with Adventure, like I'm not even sure if the first episode was the first one that I saw. I think it might have been the third, or if the third one was where Shellmon showed up, then it was that one.
That's the second one.
That's the second one? Okay.
That's the first one I saw too, the Shellmon episode.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think the Shellmon episode in some ways is actually a stronger introduction to it because it does have more of a balance between the character focus and then the action sequences and like seeing the world and building it up and explaining what the world is, which is done mostly through them exploring it rather than through actual exposition, though there's that too. In terms of like my favorite Digimon premiere, for me it's like a tie between it's not Cross Wars actually, even though that's one of my favorite series, because I was actually pretty lukewarm on Cross Wars until the like two-parter that was 7 or 8 episodes in, where like that was the moment where I was like, okay, this is Digimon. But with Digimon Tamers and Frontier are actually the ones where the first episode, I'm like, one of these is definitely my favorite opener because they both give you a pretty good look into the world that the characters live in, and you get all these environmental shots of the cities they occupy, and you get glimpses of their home life and who they are, which is actually very important for Frontier because you don't see the real world very much.
Right.
Whereas Tamers, like the real world is most of the series. The digital world parts are kind of weak compared to the bits set in the real world.
I had a very weird experience, like when so the one downside of having that marathon yesterday is that the one thing that like damages your way of refreshing my memory this way is that you're not meant to be seeing these back to back.
No,
So obviously, like my mood from like the previous ones was starting to like heavily influence my mood during later one. So the problem was that I started with Adventure, which is very like lighthearted, dorky, silly first episode, and then I also went to 02, which while it had a little more plot intrigue with the Kaiser, it also still had like Daisuke getting like almost run over by like a pilot Numemon, which is very funny because he's going like in the back. So like it had a lot of like quirkiness, and so the thing was I actually like found myself kind of really souring on Tamer's opening because it's not fun. It's not very funny at all. It's not lighthearted, and it's a lot of like people getting yelled at. It's like okay. And one thing that I thought was interesting, I said that I had a friend who was like mostly new, and so she was completely new to Tamers, like entirely like complete fresh slate, and so she actually said, I don't understand what's going on, there's too much happening. Like even though she said with Adventure, like Adventure, in her words, she described the first episode as everything happens so much. In Tamers, she was like, I don't really understand what's going on. And I feel like Tamers is definitely one of those that might have actually been very dependent on the idea that like in real life, you know what Digimon is. That it's a franchise, and that like because it took her a while to really catch on that was the meta premise that they were going for and like what entirely was going on. And Frontier she understood much better, but again, quoting her, what is the setting of nightmares? Even traveling essentially inside the stomach of a Digimon is like nightmare feel. Like she said that both Tamers and Frontier kind of came off like as horror openings almost more so than it really felt like Digimon. And like even Frontier, like even I was like my stress levels were like going up and up, especially after Tamers. Like it was really weird because I don't usually associate like Frontier with like that kind of stress, and so like my stress was like going further up and up and up, and like Tamers it didn't really go up that much further, but it was still kind of already like pretty high up there. And like thankfully we had like debates over like whether Agumon can eat hamburgers, like relieving me a little bit. But even Savers does kind of drop you in really fast and doesn't take it slowly. So I would realize I was really relieved for Crosswords opening coming around just because it was fun. Like it was just like very charming, and for some reason having everything being over the top and straightforward suddenly actually felt like kind of a relief. And even like Hunters, like I was watching it and I'm like, was Takedo always this funny? like I was having that kind of feeling. Like I almost wanted to rewatch both of them again like after like all of that.
The Tamers opening, like I agree with you, it's not fun. And I think that Tamers as a whole is actually a very depressing series to watch. The hope isn't really found until the very end, and it's kind of a bittersweet hope.
Even then, like one of my major criticisms of like the like dark and edginess in this is some of it just feels spiteful. Like it just feels there just to have like things be like miserable more than it actually means anything. And that was like when I was watching like the first episode, I think this is more so with the Japanese version. I think the dub version is a little lighter because they added like a lot more like jokes everywhere, but like in Tamers the original Japanese version there's almost like no jokes at all for the or like humor at all in like the entire first episode. And so I was thinking like this is definitely well put together from a writing perspective, but like my stress levels are peaking right now.
Well, I think that's intentional. I mean, there's a lot
It
of
is
silence
intentional.
and like empty moments where they dwell on the characters and they just hold the shot for you. And I think that, I mean, Tamers' strengths are in comparison to the other series. It doesn't stand alone very well as a Digimon series. You have to like have the idea of the others in mind to get what it's going for with being so different and, well, the word is overused, but dark, you know.
Yeah, dark and not necessarily doesn't mean dark cannot be equated to good necessarily. And I think that kind of like drove it home when I was watching this, because I was thinking like, I mean, you know, whether you like humor or not, whether you're here for like, but even like my friend saying this feels feels more like a horror series. And like, yeah, if you came in hoping for a kids series to lighten your day, this may not be what you're looking for, and that kind of makes it a little inaccessible. It was kind of like what I was a little worried about, and it was also a little bit of what I was worried about with Ghost Game when they were saying that it was going to be like a bit of horror atmosphere. But then, like, because we had more like punchlines, like Kiyoshiro being an absolute idiot.
I mean, I think this was an attempt with Tamers. They were trying to grow with the audience a bit so that they would retain their audience over time rather than have a fleeting demographic. And these days, I think Digimon, it's kind of all over the place, right? That you have like different products targeted at different age brackets. Whereas back then,
Right.
everything kind of had to do, well, the anime had to be one product for everybody that was a fan of Digimon. And that's very difficult to be.
And it also like has that question of like what feels like Digimon, because like my friend wasn't necessarily saying that it has to feel like Adventure in Zero too, especially because she says she really liked Cross Wars, which is like concept wise extremely different from the original. But like she liked the fact that a lot of the Digimon were really cute, both in personality and in design, and like that felt more at home for her than like Tamers and Frontier, which, as she said, felt more like a horror show. And so I guess it kind of like when you think about it, like, you know, especially in that question that like everyone's like talking about right now, what actually constitutes a Digimon series? Like, does Atmon count as Digimon? Does this series count as Digimon? Which like this question is going to get more and more extended as you know, I mean, at this point, you know, I'm saying this because I'm coming from Nichiyasa Kids time, you know, you are going to have to get more in your face with different premises instead of just trying to sell your product alone on just like a kid and a Digimon. Now you're going to have to say a kid and a Digimon in what context? Because like kind of like how like Precure has to have like a distinctive theme every year. So I think this is the first time we're getting something that has like this like out there of a theme that's so far detached from the usual, and that like it's about ghosts. That's specific. That's really specific. But at the same time, it's like for me, I'm thinking like, yeah, this is a pretty natural progression for a series that's gone long enough, and then every series needs to have more individuality. So the question is, within that individuality, how do you still stay close to what people perceive as like the core of the series? That's a question I don't know if it's really answerable, because like Atlia has the same question, and other than like the fact that like it's expected that it should be about like normal life instead of grand JRPG scale plots, nobody has really figured out an answer to like what makes an Atlia game, because it changes system and story like every game. So it's like in the end you may not have a concrete answer for this, and maybe that's the good thing.
Well, I think the answer to the question of what is Digimon is actually very simple, because whatever's currently airing is not Digimon, and what has ever already finished is Digimon, and whatever's currently on can't possibly live up to that.
Yeah, it's like it's easy to think about how like now the hot topic is whether Atmon is Digimon or not, but it's like we've moved so far past like the idea of Frontier not being like everyone assumes Frontier counts as Digimon.
That used to not be Digimon, right?
Yeah, right. Like they're turning Digimon. That's not Digimon.
Okay, for all the new fans coming into this discussion that have like not been part of the 20-year Digimon discourse, I want you to know that when Digimon Tamers was new and airing, it was accused of not being Digimon enough.
Yeah, like everyone's not used to like the idea of like things changing so much every year. But like, I mean, come on, Kamen Rider has existed for like literal decades, and even the Japanese fan base has an argument every year about whether this is proper Rider enough, you know? So you're never going to be free from this argument ever.
It's also like if you free your mind of taking Frontier as being a given fact, like that was a season themed around trains. So like themed around ghosts isn't too far of a stretch, you know?
You know, especially with like, you know, the ghost thing, like substantially, we've had this before. We had the first like 10, 11 episodes of Savers where, you know, it was solving mysteries kind of, even if it wasn't necessarily ghosts. And we had like Cyber Sleuth, which was like almost all about that. And so, and we had like even Adventure in Zero too, if you want to talk more about like literal ghosts, we had like the implication that like Digimon are actually yokai.
Yeah, I think conceptually, plot-wise, this is like very familiar territory. The only thing that's actually like diverging is the style and tone and the spooky vibes.
Yeah,
leaning into that. And yeah, I think it's so far striking a good balance of like the fun of that, you know, like a kid-friendly haunted house and not a like gore-filled,
right,
you know, like R-rated movie.
Someone said it reminded of like Road Doll books.
Yeah.
Actually, I did have an interesting story, and I apologize because it does kind of sound like so. Full disclosure: this is another person's opinion, not mine. I am quoting this as an example of how people can have very different stances. This is not my opinion. But you know, when Atmon first came out, right, and like everybody was like, this was before we came to realize what kind of series Atmon was going to turn into. So the question is like, is it Digimon enough? Was even bigger back then. And the first episode came out, and this was, for context, this was when Try was also out at the same time. So like we had basically 2 examples right there. And this person said, I don't think Try feels like Digimon to me, but Atmon does. And I asked why, because that's like a real, that's like, to make this kind of statement, like that sounds like totally illogical, because like you have one of the sequels to Adventure, which is like one of the original series that established our expectations of Digimon. And then you have Atmon, which is like overturning all of those and literally like almost feels like it's like using a completely different concept, the original Digimon. So I said, why does this feel more Digimon to you? The answer is because one thing that they were really frustrated about with Try was that like there was no sense of like actual connection between the human and the partner. It just felt like a teen melodrama that happens to have Digimon in it. Just like the whole like interaction or the feeling that they were so like there was some like special relationship that was basically like just borderline absent for them, and it just didn't feel right at all. Whereas in Atmon, like literally the first thing we got was like a whole like 10-15 minutes of like Haru and Gatchmon banter and how they came to like started like connecting with each other. And so because that element is present, or at least, or in the case of Frontier, it's like, you know, maybe not necessarily with a partner, but like maybe that partner is yourself. So like the interaction with like the human and their personal growth with the Digimon elements was very closely tied. That was not present in Try for them. So that was why, by their specific definition, Atmon qualifies more as a Digimon series than Try does, which is like a very interesting like perspective to hear from like somebody who has that narrow of a definition. But like at the same time, this is kind of what goes to show you like how all of these standards are really arbitrary, you know?
I mean, I hope your friend like went underground, changed their name, and moved houses after that, because that's an opinion that could, oh boy.
Yeah, get you killed.
Yeah. The Try fans they'll crucify you for that one. Atmon is Digimon and Try isn't. Okay.
It's a radical opinion, but that's what I'm saying. Like that sounds like the like pinnacle of like the anti-conventional like opinion of what is Digimon and what's not, right? But like that's an opinion someone can have.
Yeah, it is. Okay, so I have all of the Digimon episodes open right now, and I was flipping through
All
them.
of them?
Yes. Just the first episodes. I have 200 plus episodes open right now. And I just realized Digimon Frontier's first episode, it's the only isekai series where the protagonist dodges a truck. Takia almost gets hit by a truck in the first episode.
Toya, you haven't seen my theory video where he actually died, and this is all fiction in his brain.
But that's just a game theory.
Oh no.
A ghost game theory.
A game to decide your future. Okay.
I mean, in talking about comparing all of the premieres, I was like, okay, and also having watched Squid Game recently, I'm like, okay, what if there was a podcast format where each week you watch the first episode of every series and then voted on the worst one, eliminated that one, and then the next week watch the second episode of all the ones that are left, eliminated the worst one, and then eventually got to a winner.
Digimon first episode battle royale.
Yeah, basically. But yeah, when I was like rating the premieres by my like lukewarm, intrigued, or hooked metric, I realized that I either have bad taste, or like the things that I'm hooked by early on have very little actual signal for whether I love the series in the end, or like the thing that I am or am not hooked by often ends up not being that important in the scheme of things.
And yeah, I think that's fine. And I think like personal taste is like a question. It's like for me, what I was actually looking for when I started with this, because like I said, we even all said that like our opinions on every series have been changing all the time. What's our favorite and what's not. On like when I rewatched it, I almost completely changed my opinion. So in the end, I don't think I can take this as a metric of how much I liked it. So what I wanted to check yesterday is, do I feel like each first episode was actually properly representative of the goals and the priorities they had for the rest of the series? That was like one of the things I wanted to check. And I think for every single one, I can comfortably say that I think they were. Whether that means you liked what they went for, I don't know. And yeah, perhaps when you've only had that first episode rather than the retrospect, you know, you may not notice things as easily. But I think it turns out, like, if I look at Crosswords, like the first episode was so shamelessly in your face with like what I call like big fun. So it's like we did learn about the characters, but like more that they're like more in the sense of like seeing how quirky they were, and we immediately just got into like the huge like in your face, like, you know, they're not even subtle about like literally everything. They're extremely straightforward, easy to understand. Then you get to the ending and there's even like a villain like plotting coalition, which is like kind of stereotypical, but it's like otherwise very easy to understand that there's a bunch of secret villains back having like a fight, having like a consultation. Very easy to understand, and I think I could say that about the rest of Crosswords too. Very straightforward series, that one, you know?
Yeah. I remember the thing that I put Cross Wars as one of the ones I was really hooked by at the time, because the one thing I like narrowed in on was the like vision of this like epic grand war, and I was like, oh man, like this really like gritty Digimon season. I can't wait. It's gonna be like Game of
Gritty.
Thrones.
Gritty Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones for Digimon.
In hindsight, I'm like, wow.
I mean, towards the end of Death Generals, yeah, it gets quite a bit of Game of Thrones. They start rolling the dice to see who dies, but
It's a very different kind of gritty than what we were thinking, maybe. But yeah, the reason why I wanted to see was, I just wanted to think, like, what is the likelihood of all of the things we're catching on to in this first Ghost Game episode going completely nowhere? And, like, the fact that they're, like, and especially because, we're worried about, like, having come off the reboot and it might turn out to be similar to the reboot. And I think, like, after having seen the actual first reboot episode and realizing how many of the signs of what kind of series it would turn into were so clearly there from the beginning, like, I think it is, like, safe to, like, take all the little nods and the nuance and the nods and like all the characters' characterization and that we're going to get to know them later. I think it's safe to at least say that there's a likelihood those things are going to be more prioritized than in the reboot. To what extent, I don't know. And, with like how much they're going to go into different things, or like if there's something bugging us, that may also, become to be like representative too. And so that doesn't necessarily mean you may like it, dislike it, or anything like that. However, I don't think it's unreasonable to like look at this and like look at what makes it unique and think like, yeah, they're going to go further with this.
Yeah, I guess actually it's a good pivot point too, because I don't think we've talked about anything that we disliked. So I think let's move into our like closing thoughts and rate this episode. But along the way, I'll mention that one thing that I am hesitant about and worry about as a trend is the product placement angle. The fact that this is the Digivice is an existing product. It's the Vital Bracelet that's been out in Japan for, is it about a year or half a year?
Half a year.
Half a year. And I don't know, it's a weird fit, because like they're kind of incorporating some mechanics of the device, which is like a Fitbit-esque thing that, like your Digimon evolves based on the fitness parameters based on your activity. And like the thing where Ganmon got power from Hero was like one of the activity rings closing from the Vital Bracelet, and I was like, that's the same visual as the Vital Bracelet, but mechanic is completely unrelated, unless they're implying that because Hero ran to get to the fight, that did it. I don't know.
I think it was supposed to be just the synchronization of thematically speaking, the synchronization. Right. I do notice, when I was first hearing about Ghost Game's premise, I did think like one of the first things I think was like, Vital Bracelet is really big on those like ARG elements, especially when I saw like the thing that like, the Vital Bracelet has the ability to show Digimon that exist, like that make you see Digimon. So I'm like, that's kind of similar to like when you go to like the NFC thing and you scan it and there's a Digimon to battle, right? So like there is some, and especially when Hiro meets his dad in the room, and it like momentarily transforms like the area, and his dad actually says like your world will change, and it's kind of like the area visiting like in the Vital Bracelet. So I do think there is some kind of like tie between like the ARG elements and the fact that like you're seeing like things and invisible things in the world. I guess it's kind of similar to how like the Frontier D scanner let you like scan barcodes and find Digimon in them, but like more integrated with the actual toy/device. And I think it's also, maybe it might just be a little bit of shock compared to prior Digimon series, which were like, as we said, arguably even really bad at selling the toys that like they were trying to sell, because there was not really a huge connect between like how the toy worked. And I'm coming from like Kamen Rider and like Precure, where like they definitely integrate those toys much more prominently. So this is just like the first time we're seeing it like so deeply entwined with like Digimon, to the point they're even like demonstrating how to put in the cards, because it is a bit more of a complicated device than your usual Digimon VPET device, because usually the VPET device is just like a brick of plastic and you do things to it, but the operation is a little more complicated. So and especially I guess that is why like in Kamen Rider and Precure and Sentai, like you do have to actually see them like demonstrate how to use the actual device. I think the closest comparison is actually Atmon, because that's the only one where the device was another sound and toy thing rather than an actual VPET. And so like when you see like the whole sequence involves like how to actually demonstrating how to like open the thing, how to put the chip in, how to close the thing, and how like you have to do that when the actual toy is a certain degree of complicated. So I think you do like have to realistically expect that's going to happen.
Yeah, and I guess like the Kamen Rider, the Precure comparisons, the Atlon comparison, like even if it feels shoehorned in and kind of like hitting us on the head with the advertising, like there are lots of counterexamples where like that can still tell a really satisfying narrative, even if it is really blatant product placement.
Yeah.
So
Jeff, I come from card game anime where I am accustomed to every single thing on the screen being an ad, and I still campaign for the fact that Digimon should have an actual card game anime. So the Vital Bracelet, this is very tame to me.
I think there was also one interesting thing when Star Twinkle Precure first came out, and that was the first one where the transformation sequence had singing in it. Because if you've ever seen that series, yeah, they actually sing along. They actually sing during the transformation. And the reason why they did this was because they said in the advertising they wanted to have some kind of interactive element so the kids could sing along, or when it was on screen. So there is some like segments like you want to make that part also fun while you're at it, instead of just saying like, yeah, this is how you do the toy.
I'm imagining a future Precure group watch where you make us all sing along.
No.
well, I mean, okay, that one complaint that I had out of the way. I mean, I am pretty positive on the episode. I feel like I was not, super, super hooked. Like there wasn't anything.
Yeah.
There was no concept like the Digimon Emperor or Kaiser that like blew my mind and made me like, oh my god, I need to watch more.
Yeah.
So like that's kind of what I consider like the high bar of like, oh my god, this concept is so cool. I need to watch the season.
Right.
So I'm like a little middle of the road, but like it is showing all the right signs. So I think I'm gonna give this episode a 4 out of 5.
I think I'll agree on that same part for the exact same reason.
Gamamon is right there. Your hook is right there. He is adorable, and I give him 5 out of 5 stars, Jeff. 5.
I'll give a 5 to Gamamon.
Gamamon is not okay. Wait, okay. So Toyo, you're giving me 5 stars. So I wanted to have a segment where instead of the MVP like we did for Adventure 2020, it's going to be Ghost of the Month. But this one's a little weird because we only have 1 episode. Normally we have 4 episodes to go on. But I'm going to pick someone from the opening since it's a weird format. My Ghost of the Month is I don't remember the name. The green evolution for Gamamon.
Oh,
the one that is a Triceratops, but the 3 horns are guns. Like,
are those guns? I thought those are like construction beams or something. Oh no, they are guns.
He shoots with one of them, I think, in the opening.
Okay.
I thought they were like electrical lasers.
Okay, they're Waizen, right? Waizen.
Waizen Gamamon.
I don't know German or whatever language that is. I was wondering whether people would like that because the two like the metal beams like were a little dorky. So I was wondering if people would dislike it, but that actually seems to be one of the most popular ones.
I think it's the most like absurd, like the kind of like if you describe a Digimon on paper and it's like, oh my god, Digimon would do something that's absurd. And
I'm glad people have tastes. I think Digimon is best when it's a little weird. So I agree. But actually, my favorite is actually Gulus, the black one, and it's not because I'm edgy, but okay, maybe it is a little because I'm edgy. But I also think like bright neon color accents on black is such a good combo for me. So
is he going to be your Ghost of the Month?
I guess so. Sure.
I'm pretty sure they are guns because in the like official artwork for the green evolution, it's like there's smoke coming out of it, like it just fired.
And the description if you do go on Wikimon, there's a description that mentions it shooting stuff from its cannons under the attacks.
Triceragunmon. I love him.
Triceragunmon.
Toya, who's your Ghost of the Month?
My Ghost of the Month is Slenderman, who is at like 45 seconds into the opening. He's got dark evolved Slenderman. No, this one has a face. It can't be Slenderman. It's got to be Gamamon in the backpack though.
Yeah,
like that's amazing.
Yeah,
I have to say that opening was timed insanely well to the music.
Yes, and that opening is great.
Oh yeah, we barely talked the opening, but it is directed by Kakudo of Adventure directing fame and has so many cameos of like people are still poring over all of the silhouettes and identifying Digimon that they reference, and like some of the ones that I was like, there's nothing to identify this on. It's like, no, this eye and mouth, it's definitely Mugenjimon, and like you can see that. I mean, if you assume that there are basically confirmed that there's a Mugenjimon, a Puppetmon, a Metal Fugimon, and a Piedmon doing the it pose.
Yeah, he's such a cinema nerd. So, like, of course, he put a ton of like horror flick references in it because he's so into like Western cinema. But yeah, it's interesting because he has kind of implied. I don't think he's ever said it directly, but he's kind of implied that he actually likes unit direction work more than he likes being a director of a whole series. Like Adventure in 02 was just like that time I got to do like everything I wanted once in my life. Like I bucket listed it, and then like after that, I'm just going back to unit direction work. So I feel like I kind of like this was like my first time I really got to feel like oh wow, he's really good as a unit director. But I was really like, especially as a music nerd, I was actually really like impressed by how well they timed even like little details to like the music. Like there's like a xylophone sound, or like I don't know if it's a xylophone or a kalimba, but like when Kiyoshida falls down the stairs. So like that like timing was really good.
I didn't notice that detail, but I'm excited to keep listening to the song, and I wonder if it's getting my hopes up too high, probably. But like, I mean, it seems like the kind of opening that you could easily tweak over time with the silhouettes becoming not silhouettes, or like,
Yeah, or change little things here and there.
yeah,
No,
yeah.
don't get your hopes up for that. Cardfight Vanguard, believe in my existence. We were hoping for weeks on end that the face down cards in the opening would turn face up as the episodes got closer to the season finale. It never happened.
I'm so sorry.
Sounds like you overdressed your expectations.
Ugh. Yeah, you laugh it up. Overdressed just started, I think. Season 2, anyway.
Well, the last thing I want to talk about, which is kind of a little bit of a soapbox that I'm going to stand on for a little bit here. I've been really excited seeing people that are, you know, like fell off Adventure 2020, weren't that interested in Adventure 2020, who are like excited to get into this new series, and seeing a lot of people go around like, oh, where can I watch it and stuff. And I want to take this opportunity to just like explain some of the like behind the scenes mechanics of the anime industry, the like some of this comes from my perspective as a fan. Some of it comes from working in the anime industry and seeing things. But like, I think supporting Digimon's official release through streaming websites to watch the series is really important. I think something like Adventure was such a known entity and such a known name that like it could bank on, you know, like just everyone seeing it and knowing what it was. And since this is much more of a unknown entity, I think it's even more vital that we support it well, especially if we want to signal that they should keep investing in projects like this and not endless adventure nostalgia. So like Digimon is not that popular of a series or franchise, and compared to other forms of media like manga or light novels, anime is one of the safest bets, which means that like investing in other things like bringing over manga or games, you know, like the anime needs to perform really well to make it worth doing those other riskier things.
Let me put it this way. When we were in that period between Cross Wars Atmon and finally the reboot, there were some people who legitimately thought that the 3-year break was just between each series was just like a tradition or something, that like they're going to air a series and wait 3 years and air a series and then no, between those like 3-year periods, between every single time, that means the franchise was about to die.
Yeah.
Like every time they've tried to bring it back, it was literally yanking it back from the grave every single time. It's actually kind of like insane that they've been still trying that even after like it flopped like 3 times. Like if I'm not even like exaggerating when I say if this doesn't work out, the franchise might die again.
Yeah, like I can understand fans and fandoms that are so large that like no matter what they do, no matter how the fandom acts, it's going to succeed. But Digimon is not one of those fandoms. Digimon is a franchise that like has been on the verge of collapsing over and over, and even not just on the Japanese side, but on the localization side.
Especially on the localization
we
side.
went through like long periods, you know, like all the effort put into oh no, I can't remember the name of it. Operation Decode, trying to like convince Bandai to bring over Digimon games to the West. Like there was a period where it seemed like it was an impossibility to get Digimon games in the West. And I think modern fans kind of take that for granted a little bit. You know, like all the discourse about when's Digimon Survive coming out, like we take it for granted that we're going to get it. That was something that 6 years ago wasn't
a thing. Like I don't think people know this, but the only reason Atmon is on Crunchyroll is because they failed to get a dub network for it. So if you're one of those people thinking that like, well, it might be better if I just hold out for like a dub of the series before I try it, I am really sorry to say that there's a very high possibility it's still not happening for at least a very long time if it does at all. Like it's a very difficult, it's a much harder sell here than it is in Japan, especially because I don't even know where the hell the rights are anymore. And like it's like at this point, like I am really grateful that they are offering like the simulcast right now, because it is a way for us to finally like be able to support it rather than just like waiting for a dub that's never going to come.
Yeah. And like I like feel like the wave for Atmon was so missed because there was a fragmentation between people who wanted to wait for an official release and, you know, that waiting for a dub and that never coming and stuff. And so like it's like we have an official release coming out weekly, you know, it's a couple hours behind Japan, but aside from those couple hours, like it's fast, it seems to be translated in good quality, like everything is, they're basically giving every opportunity to support it. And it's like, okay, let's do that, let's show that, you know, like this isn't another dead end for the franchise in a way that it seemed like Atmon kind of was a little bit.
Also, like their last ad for the Digivice V, like actively leaned on the idea that this should go worldwide.
Yeah.
So they are paying attention. Like this is, I know like we're all used to the idea that like Japanese companies don't care what we think, but like no, they're paying attention.
Yeah.
I should point out while we are on this soapbox that like there are examples of series that were picked up by Crunchyroll and then dropped from it because of poor ratings. Well, ratings is a TV term, but hits, views, impressions, that kind of data. Cardfight Vanguard Asia Circuit was originally not picked up by Crunchyroll because Bushiroad, the company that owns Vanguard, looked at the data, thought that nobody was watching it when in reality people were pirating it. And the result of that was that it took like 3 months to actually get Vanguard back on, and it wasn't a sure thing that it ever would return.
Right.
Yeah.
In the case of Digimon, like this is not a super well-known fact, but all the way back in the Frontier days, the reason we did not get an anime after Frontier was because of a combination of 3 factors. First, that while Frontier's ratings were still good, they were falling compared to previous seasons. The second being that the people didn't buy the merchandise. They didn't buy the Pendulum Progress virtual pet that was released at the time.
Right.
And the third was that the annual Toei Anime Fair, which featured a Frontier film, was a financial failure. They actually had to stop doing those because they lost so much money on it.
Which I should point out had 2 other movies besides Frontier. It
Yes.
wasn't just Frontier. I think like so many people get this idea that like a Frontier flopped because it was bad if they don't like Frontier, or Frontier flopped because the concept was too different. But it's not just because of Frontier. And like I've seen cases where like, especially with like Precure, I've seen series where like one series didn't have very good like TV ratings, but like I'm telling you, there's a lot more than just that it takes to completely kill a series. But at the same time, it also means that you can't just like expect that like just because like I did this one tiny thing, that's going to like be the thing that saves everything. Because like especially if you look at the sales data for Tamers and Frontier, Tamers already was actually a huge tank compared to 02. So it was more that Frontier was the final nail in the coffin, not necessarily it by itself.
If you want Digimon to continue, you have to watch it through official sources that are being tracked like Crunchyroll, and you have to buy the merch. Those are the 2 things that keep it going.
Yes.
And it's like every little bit helps. So it's like it's easy to be like, oh well, like my impact doesn't affect things that big. Like it's cliche to say, but like everyone is able to chip in a little bit, and that's what really makes a big impact. And I mean, there's also like other positive feedback loop effects where like if it's popular on Crunchyroll, it's going to be featured by Crunchyroll on the main page and stuff. So like there's a possibility of it snowballing in that sense. So like, and there's the other factors of illicit sites that will give your computer malware or viruses and just exist by profiting off of other companies and make tons of money through ad revenue and stuff like
and Bitcoin mining.
Yeah.
Yes, they will sometimes inject Bitcoin miners into your computer. This is real.
I will say that I've heard from my friends outside the US that this particular one also seems to be more accessible to more countries than a lot of other Crunchyroll Digimon library entries.
Mm-hmm.
I did look at the list of like countries that Ghost Game is available in. It is pretty big compared to like other stuff. So like if you can, they're trying to make this accessible, really. So
yeah. And there are definitely ethical concerns and issues with the anime industry. Like animators are severely underpaid. It is a huge issue, and paying for Crunchyroll and watching through Crunchyroll streams, that money does directly go to like the production committee that helps make Digimon and helps support the franchise. It doesn't directly go to animators, and that sucks. But I don't protesting that by not giving money to Crunchyroll or to Digimon as a franchise doesn't help that situation, especially if we set a precedent that art shouldn't be paid for and that creators shouldn't get money, which is kind of what that precedent sets when we set that as a cultural norm. So I think a world where everyone values art and thinks that creators should get paid for the work is a better world, and that living conditions for animators can improve in that scenario. And if we just accept the standard that everyone gets anime for free, is a world where that becomes much harder to get animators paid well.
Yes. And I think also if they, I'm not going to say anything about your decision with yourself, but then like there are times when I see like people like, I want to watch this. Where do I watch this? And people will literally just link a link to a streaming site on public Twitter for like 20 other people to come look at. Like if there's an issue with you and yourself or like your reasons for doing things, I'm not going to probe into your personal circumstances, but don't be reckless and don't like bring other people into it when it's like not necessary.
And you may not think that your individual hit contributes much. And it's true. As one person, you might not change much. But if you watch something through the official sources and you're sharing that, other people around you, other people that are connected to you, are also more likely to be copying that same behavior. So your
Right.
individual contribution in doing this contributes towards a greater group doing it.
Right.
Yeah, like at the very, if you have like a personal scenario where you really cannot afford to pay, like I'm not certainly, I don't think any of us are going to be judging people individually, but like, you can do that in a way that doesn't spread that behavior and tell everyone else to not pay. So
Yeah.
I mean, I have I'm in this scenario where like I really want stuff like Digimon manga to get localized.
Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing that like the more public support there is for stuff like this, the more that the numbers make that an obvious financial decision, the more possible that is. And I have direct experience with that.
Like it's a parallel. It's not quite the exact same thing, but I work with the Vocaloid community a lot, and one of the biggest ongoing issues is about the question of pirating the actual like Vocaloid programs, because they're like upwards of like $150, $200, and which is often like unaffordable for the kind of indie people that this thing like caters to. And one of the biggest things like I have to point out is like constantly like, yeah, okay, but like every time all of you have started running your mouth about how cool piracy is, it results in more locking down on everything else, and a more miserable experience for like everybody else. So like, just be a little prudent and think about the impact on the community, the impact on the actual franchise itself, and the impact of what's going to happen. And that's kind of all I really have to say about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, if people want recommendations for other things to watch on Crunchyroll to make their subscription more worthwhile, I think I'd be happy on Discord to give recommendations and stuff. Like, I'm in the position of like watching so much anime that I was surprised that people think like, oh, I need to get Crunchyroll just for Digimon. Like, I forgot that people do that because I'm used to watching so much anime. So, I can definitely help with recommendations. I'm sure a lot of people in there can help with recommendations. So, if you want to make it more worthwhile, I think that's a strategy. But yeah, I mean, I think it's important to support official releases as much as possible to make sure the stuff keeps happening and that we get releases. So
Yes.
yeah, the fact that we're in this scenario with Ghost Game and we weren't with Atmon, like I'm so excited for the potential. And
Yeah.
it just bums me out seeing people I don't know, kind of squandering that potential. Which, I mean, again, not judging people, their individual viewing habits, but like the spread of it being like, oh, you want to watch it? Here, just go watch this link and stuff. And I'm like,
Yeah.
So, sorry if that was a little preachy, but that's kind of,
That's why it's a special episode.
yeah.
Special episodes are always the preachy ones.
We're sitting on, where you like turned a chair backwards and we're sitting on it. And, hello, fellow kids. Here's how you should watch your anime. But yeah, I guess on a serious note, do you have any media you've been enjoying recently you want to recommend?
Well, I was actually agonizing about what kind of thing I should recommend, because I kind of forgot what my original choice was going to be for like a week, and I was wondering like what to do up until like we started recording. But after hearing Jeff say that like he's like he's willing to offer recommendations for people who need like recommendations on what else to use their Crunchyroll stuff on, that kind of like hit me a little bit. So anyway, I think you should watch Precure. Any Precure on Crunchyroll. Even if I know people are like, what, magical girls? How is that similar to Digimon? Well, first of all, I don't even know how it's that different, because I got into Digimon because I was into magical girls. I love transformation sequence, and I love fighting entities, transforming entities. In Precure's case, it's humans. But I really also want Crunchyroll to expand their Precure catalog. And also, for me, Precure is a lot of what Digimon was aiming to be back, and that like the thing changes up and has a new fresh take on it every year. It does something that it is kind of true to the spirit, but it is different every single year. It has the similar concepts of like, individual character focus episodes, or like characters as they integrate with like real life. And that kind of thing is very endemic to the genre in general. So I think like if you kind of want a glimpse at like what kind of franchise Digimon has been aiming to be, and also why I say like the fact that it had a 3-year hiatus between every series was actually a really bad sign, because it was trying to be Precure, where you have a new thing every year, and to the point you can kind of start taking for granted that it's going to be around. That's kind of what it was going for. If you don't like flashy magical girls, I guess there's also Kamen Rider, which Shout Factory's Tokusatsu platform is also starting to really put out. Heisei and Reiwa Kamen Rider is also a lot that's why it's called the Nichiyasa Kids Time Trio, because it's Precure, Kamen Rider, and Super Sentai. And Tokusatsu is also starting to like help coordinate with like Toei to put like more of their like Tokusatsu series out there, and that's also like similar again, like a lot of character focus, a lot of developing stuff. Also, Nichiyasa's 3 shows share a ton of staff with Digimon, and it shows. So like a lot of the like sentiment and like, you know, the inner nature of humanity, kind of like all those kind of things combined with a transforming hero spiritually, like all that stuff is like all in there too. So if you want more things like Digimon, or you want a better idea of what kind of franchise it's trying to become and what it could be if this is succeeded, that's one good way to look at it.
Now I'm worried Toei's going to recommend Card Fight.
No, not this time. Actually, what's the average age of your audience on here again?
I don't know.
Well, in the spirit of things that are not Precure and they're gonna kind of struggle out here, I am recommending a totally different trading card game, Selector Infected Wicross. Which is, yes, laugh it up. Okay. This is actually one of the best made trading card games ever, which you would not believe if you looked at the art. It was designed by a former Magic the Gathering pro player. I don't think he quite made world champion, but he got pretty close. And we never really thought that this would be localized. Like the Wicross wiki had an FAQ for years where one of the questions was, will Wicross ever be localized in English? And the answer was no. But 7 years late, we are getting it, and we're not getting like every Wicross card ever printed. Instead, we're just starting at the beginning of the current Japanese format, Diva Selection. So it's only like 6 or 7 sets to catch up to, and Wicross doesn't really do like exactly monthly releases, so it's not as fast as other TCGs. It's the release schedule is more lax, and it's kind of easy to have as a second game. But it's fun because there's a lot of stuff that you can do on your opponent's turn, but those actions can generally only be done once per game. So you like have this mind game going on of, okay, should I do this now, or should I hold it for later, or should I actually use it on my own turn to push my offense? And this game the localized version is coming out November 6th, I believe, with the first starter decks, the Diva debut decks, and the first booster set. And it's actually going to have a crossover with the Niji-Sanji VTubers, specifically Sanbaka. So if you are into those VTubers, you can actually have a deck made up entirely of those cards. And unlike most of the other trading card games under the sun, there is a very accessible way to play it in the works online. It's called Open Batoru. You can find it at batoru.moe. I'll have Jeff put a link up.
It's literally .moe?
Yeah.
The .moe domain,
oh,
yes.
Top level domain. I thought they had like moe.com or something.
No, it's .moe. It's pretty great. It's still in development, but the developer says that they're going to have it out roughly around the time that Diva Selection launches in North America and Western Europe.
I think it's kind of creepy that this, at least the anime, is about like the horrors of real girls getting transformed into the card game, and then they're doing a crossover with real people as VTubers getting turned into cards.
Well, the old anime was. They've gone through a bit of a continuity reboot. So like the first couple seasons were darker, and people were like, oh, this is like Madoka Magica, but for trading card games. And the current one is like, I can't finish the season, Jeff. You'd have to bring me on a podcast to get through that crap. It's singing idol girls competing over the internet in games where the rules aren't very clear and their tits are bouncing all over the place. It's
so this is strictly the card game, not the anime.
No, that's what the anime is. I'm recommending the card game, not the anime. You can watch the original series anime on Crunchyroll. It's also licensed. I think their license is still ongoing, although the terminology is a little bit different. They decided that the official translation of growing your L rig is actually glowing your L rig, and cards get banished when they're destroyed rather than vanished. But it's one of the few trading card games that I look at and I'm like, yeah, this is balanced. At one point there were like literally 50 decks that you could play in the format. This current format we're coming up on, the selection is a little tighter because it's a smaller pool of sets you have access to, but even inside like a specific color, you will have different deck types that are viable, and you can really just pick your favorite and build a deck around it.
It's not Digimon trading card game, though.
No, it's not, Jeff.
Well, I'm going to recommend... We're all across the board here. Anime series that we actually recommend, a card game that is not out yet. I'm recommending you do not play Metroid Other M, which is a Wii game in 2010.
That bad, huh?
Oh Oh gosh, I had it. I still have my copy. I got it at launch.
I knew you were marathoning Metroid. So I now I realize this was coming.
Yeah, this is the one mainline Metroid game that I never played before, so I was dreading it. Haha, Metroid Dread. But I feel like I usually go into things like this being like, this backlash can't be that bad. Like, I'm sure I'm gonna find things that I like about it.
How bad may possibly be?
And like that's kind of true. That kind of happened, but like, oh my god, it's so. Oh my god, it's so painful. And I'll link in the show notes to a YouTube video that I watched that dives into some of the localization choices, and it seems like a lot of the things that are particularly terrible about the English version of the game come from bad localization choices, like bad acting, bad
Yeah.
writing and translation, and a lot of like details of the world building that just get completely lost. Like the fact that there's Earth in the game is just like not in the English translation, but is apparently there in Japanese and stuff like that. I don't agree with the premise of the video that I'll share. That like the conclusion of the video is that because of all these localization changes, actually the Japanese game is pretty good. And I'm like, no, it's still not, still doesn't sound good. But the gameplay is kind of ambitious in trying to be like a 3D Metroid game that feels like a 2D Metroid game, but it's just painful to play with the Wiimote.
I mean, the director is like on record saying that the NES controller is the best controller ever made, which is why you can only play it using the Wiimote held sideways. So,
And my hand is still in pain. I feel like I have to put Kiyoshiro's bandages on my hand after playing this game.
wait, did you finish it all the way?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, unfortunately.
You know there were things that could not have been injected by the localization.
Oh no.
They did not render different cutscenes for the localization.
Like the scene of the imagery of her in respect to her commander. Apparently the way they military salute in this game is everyone just giving a thumbs up, which that's the stupidest thing I've ever seen before. But her way of showing respect to her commander is that she thumbs down and pouts, and it's like, okay, actually that is kind of influenced by the translation. Apparently that like her doing it in respect to the commander was kind of added in English. Apparently in Japanese it's more like she's actually defiant. And
Well, in Japanese, a thumbs down gesture is like the equivalent to the middle finger.
oh wow, okay.
So that might be some added context there. But yeah, it's actually a vulgar gesture equivalent to middle finger. Yeah.
But just the imagery of like a bunch of like people in military uniforms giving thumbs up as if it's a military salute, just like
yeah, that part I don't think is salvageable. So then, what of the Metroid games you did play? What is your favorite?
Well, I mean,
not the upcoming one, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, I only started with. I basically was trying to play the ones that I thought would be relevant to Metroid Dread. So I started with Metroid Fusion since it's the last in the chronology, and then Other M because that's one I hadn't played, which I did not realize going into it is basically a prequel to Metroid Fusion. It's very similar in a lot of ways that made me frustrated until I realized, no, this is purposeful. This is basically leading into plot, like there are specific plot beats that are supposed to be exactly paralleled in the two games, so it's not just blatantly copying. But anyway, and then Samus Returns, which I never finished when it came out a couple years ago, and I figured that'd be interesting because it's the same studio and similar in structure to the new game. And so I haven't like replayed Samus Returns recently, or Zero Mission, or the original Metroid 2, or the recent fan remake that apparently is pretty good. So I still really love Metroid Fusion. I think that's kind of controversial among Metroid fans because it has a lot of railroading and stuff that a lot of people don't like. But I really like it's not like narrative heavy like Metroid Prime 3 or Other M, but it still has a bit of narrative.
It's okay, Jeff. I too am a fake Metroid fan who likes Fusion.
Look, okay, I said this on my Twitter the other day, but I think there's a problem with every single thing you like is generally accepted to be well liked by everyone else, because you end up getting a power trip, taking it for granted, and getting really condescending. So you need to have at least one controversial opinion in your life. It teaches you humility.
I have so many strong memories associated because I played Metroid Fusion on an emulator while watching Digimon Frontier reruns. So I'm like especially the underwater level of Fusion, I'm like, this is just the water tunnel in Frontier. But I played it while I watched that. Is that possible?
I get it.
Yeah. So anyway, Metroid, amazing series. Other M, so atrocious, so sexist, so misogynistic. Oh, and I was so disappointed. I watched a review recently that came out like a week or two ago in of Other M because of Metroid Dread coming out, and the review was basically like almost all about game mechanics and like the story details, and then said like one line about how it was like borderline sexist, and all these comments on YouTube were like, "Wow, this review is trying to be woke and stuff," and I'm like, it was the most like feminism 101, like maybe women shouldn't. It's,
Yeah,
it makes me,
yeah,
yeah.
no, like,
It's,
yeah.
I think the game is like extremely misogynistic and basically constructed so that you can see her in the Zero Suit more and more. And
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah,
"Ugh."
I
yeah.
mean, yeah, that there's a certain scene where somebody gets shot that I think you can't watch that and walk away from the game and be like, this game isn't sexist.
Yeah.
You know, despite the fact that, I'm a girl and I have a very huge stake in how well the girls are being portrayed in like all the games and media and all the things I play, despite that, I surprisingly have a pretty high amount of tolerance for like what I see, maybe just because I'm used to seeing like so much, stuff, like that, like I have to like have a high amount of tolerance, otherwise I'm not going to enjoy anything. But like when you get to the point where even I'm going like, oh, that's not good. Like, that's a line you've crossed.
Other M also cucked us out of the best final dungeon we could possibly get.
Oh, you mean like having the like, oh, here's a whole sector. Oh, no, it's not there.
Yeah, that could have been amazing. Also, the final boss sucks. The like actual final gameplay moment where you're just waggling the Wiimote around.
If there is somebody out there who actually does like this game, I'm so sorry. I am so sorry.
I'm not. Your opinions are bad.
I don't know if it's just Stockholm syndrome, but like after 100%ing it, I'm like, I kind of like some aspects of it, but were they worth it? No, they weren't worth it.
Yeah.
The post-game scenario was kind of nice.
Yeah, I don't think there's like such a thing that like something that like literally every aspect of it was terrible. But like again, was it worth the time you put it? Especially games that take like a ton of hours out of your life.
I will never get back the time I put in Mega Man Battle Network 4.
I'm so sorry.
Well, I guess that brings us to the end of the show. This month's Digiprompt is a pretty obvious one. What pre-existing Digimon would you want to see appear as a hologram ghost in Ghost Game, and what spooky thing would they do? Send any feedback to podagesdemon.com, to Podages on Twitter, or in the episode comments on podages.com. Check out the show notes to find a link to join our Discord server and continue the conversation, and share the podcast with your friends who show up in your bedroom at night, say nothing, point at a Digimon, and then leave. If this is your first episode, you can also find us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you find podcasts. And let's go around and share where people can find us on social media.
I'm Atlas Triel on Twitter. I am currently looking into other social media platforms after seeing that Twitter is thinking of embracing NFTs now.
Oh yeah. I am also looking for different social media platforms, but I've been looking, well, we've both been bouncing around trying to find places to go. You want to join me in Ragnarok Online? That place is pretty chill. My Twitter is @Tawoya, and you can find me on YouTube @Maniacs Channel, subject to change because I've really been needing to rebrand.
And I'm Definitely Jeff on Twitter, but I also have been limiting my time on social media, but I've just been spending it in Metroid Other M instead, which is not a better place to be.
Well, for now, maybe join the Discord server if you want to talk to us.
Discord server is the best place. But thank you everyone for listening, and we'll be back in 4 weeks to talk about episodes 1 through 4.
Woo! And that extremely very convenient episode that's airing, episode 4 airing on Halloween.
Oh yeah.
Halloween, y'all!
Oh no. Bye.
It's spooky! It's spooky!
Bye.
It's spooky in here!
And remember, never stop evolving.
Gotta go back to the Digi world, 'cause Digimon don't get scared.
Welcome to a special episode of Podages, a monthly gathering of disembodied voices. Wait, I should read this more spooky.
Okay.
Welcome to a special episode of Podigus.
Tori, do you want to do it? Because that was good.
You want me? Okay. Let me get water for a sec. You better use the spooky song as an opener.
I think I might use it to fade out since you brought it up right at that point. So
It should be your opener during when we actually do one on Halloween.
That's too spooky for me. It's too much horror. That's cosmic horror.